The NBA's new CBA came with a hefty set of rules to deter teams from spending big money to quote-unquote even the playing field. Teams past the first apron find themselves limited in more ways than one. Spend even more money and you'll find yourself in the second apron. Currently, the second apron sounds like a death wish, with tons of restrictions and hefty regulations. As a result, most teams have strayed away from spending big, but not all of them. In my opinion, the Boston Celtics and the Denver Nuggets are the two perfect teams to evaluate in a case study of the new NBA, and will give us a lot of understanding of how this new CBA is going to play out over the next 4 to 7 years in this current era of basketball. I think the Nuggets and Celtics are, first of all, perfect examples to pit against each other in this case study because they're the last two NBA champions. The Denver Nuggets won the NBA title in 2023, and of course the Boston Celtics finally got over the mountaintop for the first time again since 2008 this past season in 2024 as Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown and company won the Larry O'Brien Trophy this past season.
We did it!
Now, these two teams I think are very distinguishable from each other as well. First of all, Denver seems like an absolute force year in, year out in the Western Conference because they have arguably the best player in the world, and between these two teams, the clearly defined best player. Nikola Jokic is head and shoulders better than anyone on the Boston Celtics. But what the Celtics have is this really great core nucleus of players who fit together stylistically. Both Boston and Denver are very great teams, but they're very different teams as well, with different men running the show there for these organizations. And that's where we get to Brad Stevens for the Boston Celtics versus Calvin Booth for the Denver Nuggets. Now, Calvin Booth took over the GM spot for Tim Connolly when he left Denver for Minnesota. Obviously, in Calvin Booth's first year as GM, well, he ended up winning the NBA title with the Denver Nuggets. So a lot of credit to him here, but he's building very differently than Brad Stevens and doing a lot of things very, very differently from Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens has been extremely aggressive in his tenure as the lead decision maker for the Boston Celtics after moving out of coaching into the front office. And I think Brad Stevens has done a tremendous job. He's been very aggressive, at times trading away picks, at times acquiring draft picks, and making non-popular moves, trading away Kemba Walker in a first-round pick for Al Horford. That was a questionable decision at the time given how Al Horford's tenure in Philadelphia went. Al Horford obviously has been tremendous for the Boston Celtics since. And then obviously there's the era where Brad Stevens traded away Marcus Smart, a key quote-unquote heart and soul guy for the Boston Celtics, traded him for Kristaps Porzingis. You also saw then afterward trading away Robert Williams for Drew Holiday, trading out a couple of draft picks and Malcolm Brogdon in that deal as well. Brad Stevens has been extremely aggressive as a lead decision maker for the Boston Celtics. In addition to Stevens' aggressive trades, he has not been reluctant at all to hand out massive paydays for players who are well deserving. You look at the contract extensions for the Jays. Jason Tatum, a record-breaking contract extension this offseason. You go back an offseason ago, Jaylen Brown signed a record-breaking contract extension with the Boston Celtics that was met with heavy criticism, not from myself, but from a majority of the basketball world. Most people just did not understand why Jaylen Brown, with the inflation of the NBA, was worth that contract. Newsflash, he was. He's now an Eastern Conference Finals MVP and an NBA Finals MVP a year later. In addition to the Jays, Stevens has committed a lot of money to the other core players on the Boston Celtics. You look at Derek White and Drew Holiday, the two key defensive-minded guards there in Boston that give the Celtics so much defensive versatility, a lot of shot blocking out of the backcourt, quick hands, activity, very quick feet, decisive playmaking and defensive play as well. Just honestly, two incredible guards. I don't have to tell you guys how talented these players are, but the reality is Brad Stevens and the Boston Celtics have committed a ton of money to their starting lineup, especially when you factor in Kristaps Porzingis, who's making over $30 million a year himself as well after being traded from the Washington Wizards. The Celtics have a lot of money committed to their starting five, but that's not where the money stops here for the Boston Celtics. They are a team built right now on continuity. They retained a majority of their championship winning roster by keeping guys like Xavier Tillman, giving an extension last offseason to Peyton Pritchard as well, 4 years, $30 million. And then this offseason, inking Sam Hauser to his own extension at 4 years, $45 million. So a lot of money being printed right now out of TD Garden, giving money out to the top 7 or 8 guys there in Boston. But it's been well worth it. The Celtics, coming off of a championship run, they have committed a ton of money to this current roster. And if we look at the reverse option here, what the Denver Nuggets are doing, this is where things become very polarizing. The Denver Nuggets obviously won the title 2 seasons ago. They won it with Bruce Brown as their 6th man, and arguably the best starting 5 in all of basketball with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic. A tremendous starting 5 that fits together like a glove. Fast forward to today though, the Nuggets have lost some real key pieces. They lost Bruce Brown to the Indiana Pacers. Now he's since then been traded on a 2-year contract, and it was a lot of money. I can't blame the Denver Nuggets for not paying Bruce Brown $23 million a year. I totally, completely understand that decision. Bruce Brown was going to be a tough player for them to retain, even had he signed for a little bit north of the non-taxpayer mid-level exception that offseason. Instead, he signed for nearly double that number. So I can't blame the Denver Nuggets and Calvin Booth for not keeping Bruce Brown. What I can do, though, is blame them for letting Kentavious Caldwell-Pope walk in free agency. And the reason I feel like it's very fair to point to some of these key losses, key departures for the Denver Nuggets, is the lack of really established depth that's going to be able to fill these roles, especially from a playstyle perspective. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But losing KCP to the Orlando Magic, I think, is going to be a very devastating loss for the Denver Nuggets for a few reasons. One, the Nuggets, who I think a year ago we could see kind of the lack of depth and some of the struggles that was presented to this team without Bruce Brown on the roster. You now lose one of your starting 5 members. You're asking some of your young core pieces to take a big step forward. Could Christian Brown fill some of that production from Kentavious Caldwell-Pope? I definitely think so. I do like the young talent Denver has on the fringe and the kind of bench of their roster. I do. I think there's some real opportunity here for some of these young guys to step up, grow as individual players, and gain respect not only around the league, but in their own locker room there in Denver. And I think that some of their additions did make some sense as well this offseason, but losing some of their core nucleus in Bruce Brown and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope when you have a contending team is very, very difficult. To me, the entire point of the second apron is to prevent teams from trying to buy their way to championships. It's trying to prevent teams from trading a whole bunch or trying to just pay a ton of money out in free agency to win NBA championships. What it's not intended to do is to punish teams that have drafted or organically built their teams, like the Denver Nuggets for the most part have, drafting Nikola Jokic, drafting Jamal Murray, drafting Michael Porter Jr., trading for Aaron Gordon on a cost-controlled deal, trading for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope on a cost-controlled deal. These are not the teams that are supposed to break apart because of this second apron. And part of the issue with Calvin Booth's decision-making here, the entire point to even go into the second apron is if you're legitimately good enough to win an NBA championship. And 24 months ago, we saw that the Denver Nuggets were, in fact, good enough to win an NBA title with the way their roster was constructed. Again, I understand not keeping Bruce Brown, but letting KCP walk for nothing is going to be very detrimental to Denver in a very tough Western Conference where a lot of teams got better this offseason. It's going to be hard for Denver to overcome some of their depth deficiencies and overall roster construction deficiencies, despite having arguably the very best player in the world in Nikola Jokic, a player who, with his court mapping, his overall feel for the game, his skill, his touch, his strength, something that doesn't get talked about enough. He's not this wow athlete from a leaping perspective or a speed perspective, but he's a tremendous athlete from a strength, coordination, and touch, feel, playmaking perspective that no one gives him enough credit for his overall quality play as an athlete from an endurance standpoint, a strength standpoint. And yet Nikola Jokic, I think his team is almost working against him in a way by not keeping some of this core talent, especially essential talent, in the way that you look at how these teams play. Denver, a team that does not shoot a ton of threes, already lost one of their best three-point shooters in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and who did they replace him with? Again, I've referenced Christian Braun, maybe stepping into the starting lineup. You look at a guy like Julian Strawther, who they drafted out of Gonzaga last season in the 2023 NBA draft. I think Julian Strawther has a good chance of stepping up. Now, they did bring in Dario Saric, a big man who I think can fill a good role for them off the bench. That was a big upgrade for them. They drafted Day'Ron Holmes II. Now, unfortunately, an injury is going to slow down the beginning of his career. We're not going to get to see him this upcoming season, but I did like that draft pick for them in a vacuum. And then the addition of Russell Westbrook. And this is where things get interesting. Russell Westbrook does fit some areas of Denver's flaws. I think Denver as a team could look to play faster. I think getting a little bit of that frenetic pacing could be extremely beneficial for them at times. I also think that Russell Westbrook's rebounding, I think that Russell Westbrook's playmaking, passing is going to be beneficial as well. The question is, how do you maximize that without also being exploited for some of the weaknesses that Russell Westbrook brings inherently to your offense most specifically? And the real flaw that I'm most critical of in Denver right now is the three-point shooting. Again, losing KCP, arguably one of your 2 or 3 best three-point shooters on the roster, for nothing, and then replacing him with Russell Westbrook is going to be, I think, a real challenge for this team to try and overcome in the upcoming season for a few different reasons. Let's compare Denver to Boston from a statistical standpoint in a few key areas. The first one, again, is the three-point attempts per game that I want to look at. The Boston Celtics led the entire NBA in three-point attempts per game this past season with an astonishing 42 three-point attempts per game. You look at the Denver Nuggets, well, they finished last in that category. And if you're going to finish last in three-point attempts, you would hope you make it up in some other way, whether that be transition opportunities or free throw rate. And, well, guess what? Boston outperformed Denver in both of those areas as well. Last year, neither Boston nor Denver were elite at getting to the free throw line, but you can really understand that for Boston's perspective, a team that is very reliant on perimeter jump shooting, they're not going to get to the line a bunch. But for Denver, a team that didn't take a ton of threes, well, this is where some of the problems lie. Now, obviously, Jokic doesn't get every whistle he probably deserves. I think we can all agree on that. But when you have guys like Jamal Murray, who's predominantly a mid-range jump shooter, he's not going to get to the free throw line maybe as much as you would love for him to. And this is where, maybe Russell Westbrook, Christian Braun, them seeing more minutes in Denver could help them get to the free throw line a little bit more. It's also going to raise some problems, though, with that three-point rate to begin with. And then the pace. This is where, again, maybe Denver's gotten a little bit better. They're increasing their pace a bit with Russell Westbrook. They're increasing their pace with Christian Braun probably playing more, maybe more Peyton Watson minutes as well. But on the flip side, is it enough to make up the math differential where Boston already has a significant advantage from just a three-point attempt rate over the Denver Nuggets, and how Denver's going to have an uphill battle against teams like Minnesota, against a team like Dallas, who ranked second last year in three-point attempts per game? There's going to be a lot of difficulties for Denver to overcome, and they're going to really rely on Nikola Jokic to be good enough to overcome all of the other flaws and deficiencies on this roster because of Denver cheaping out a little bit and not retaining some of their core nucleus in order to avoid the second apron, something Boston has not done at all. Boston has not been hesitant to avoid the second apron in any way. And I think there's going to be a big difference in how these two teams play out over the next few years because of those decisions. And again, remember, the style of play, when I'm talking about the three-point attempt rate, this is where personnel really, really, really matters. The Boston Celtics have built their team around shooting three-pointers. And that math advantage for them, night in, night out, helps them win a ton of games because of the spacing, the complexity of their offense, the ability to consistently generate good looks out of drive and kick basketball, pick and pop basketball, and also having a unique player like Kristaps Porzingis who can anchor your defense while being an elite three-point shooting big man. That's a special player that it's hard to replicate. Not every single team's going to have a Kristaps Porzingis, but when you're Denver and you have a Nikola Jokic, putting high-level shooting around him should be an obvious decision. With his passing ability, his ability as a scorer out of the low post, it should be a no-brainer to put shooting around him. And that's something Denver has been really not quick to do, and they've really struggled to do, especially in recent years, losing some key contributors. Even Jeff Green, a player I haven't mentioned up to this point, losing him as well. Another veteran that they let go out the door. I understand, again, not paying him what Houston ultimately did, but right now at this point in time, it does look like the Denver Nuggets are heading toward, I wouldn't say disaster, because their roster is still so good, especially at the top with Nikola, Jokic, Jamal Murray, that two-man game, very, very talented. Michael Porter Jr., I think a tremendous fit around those two guys. Aaron Gordon, I think a very talented player as well, who can do a number of different things for your team. I still like Denver's core, and that's why I still think they're the perfect team to compare to Boston, because Boston has spent so much money. They've committed so much into being a second apron team, not only now, but for the foreseeable future with the extensions of the Jays and Drew Holiday and Derek White. The Celtics are committed for at least 4 years of second apron type pay. The Denver Nuggets eked out of the second apron by letting KCP walk. When it comes to my prediction, I think the Boston Celtics are the only team in the NBA right now who really understand how the CBA works. Once you exit that second apron, a team like Denver, for example, who bowed out of the second apron by not keeping KCP, there was no tangible, feasible way for Denver to replace KCP's production and talent level. They just couldn't do it. What it opened for them was the taxpayer mid-level exception. They used that on Dario Saric. Now, point blank, tell me right now in the comment section, would you rather have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or would you rather have Dario Saric? Because ultimately, the Denver Nuggets, they made their decision. They decided they would rather have Dario Saric this upcoming season than KCP in order to avoid the second apron. I think that's a flat-out terrible decision. I think there's going to be a lot of problems for Denver. Now, it doesn't mean that they're dead in the water. They have a very good team still. And I think that they're going to be able to compete in the Western Conference and maybe even win the Western Conference. I wouldn't be shocked if Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets are good enough to get out of the West once again at some point over the next couple of years and maybe even win another NBA Finals, because Jokic is that good of an individual talent, and they have a great coach in Michael Malone. The team is really well built, and they have a bunch of talent still. The question is, are they optimizing that talent? And to me, the answer is no. Whereas on the other side of the coin, the Boston Celtics, I think Brad Stevens has done a tremendous job optimizing this team, building around a non-perfect superstar in Jason Tatum, a player who I think we would all agree is probably a top 10 player in the world, but not a top 5 player in the world. He might get more out of this Boston Celtics team than the Denver Nuggets do out of Nikola Jokic, which is, one, ridiculous, and two, a testament to how Boston is building, how they're not acting afraid of the second apron, and understanding that this is go time right now. They have a team that is good enough to not only win one championship, but maybe multiple. I would have felt the same way about Denver, but they have bowed out of the second apron. They have been afraid of the second apron, and I think that is the biggest mistake right now for the Denver Nuggets. I think when you are in this position to win a championship or maybe multiple, you need to push your chips in, especially with other teams being afraid of the second apron, maybe cutting down their spending a little bit. Right now is go time. If you're a winning team, you should be pushing your chips in. I think Denver has been reluctant to do so. Boston has done so. And I think as a result, the Boston Celtics will see the better results during this 5 to 7 year case study, despite not having a Nikola Jokic level player. It'll be an interesting case study to follow. Let me know down in the comment section below who you think is going to end up quote unquote winning this case study. Thanks everyone for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.